The race to make the best model for coding with AI is insane, and there's a new entrant that I did not expect at all. V0 by Vercel just dropped their own model. I really did not expect this. There isn't much in terms of detail for what that means. Like, is this a custom GPT? Is this something they trained from scratch? It's really hard to know for sure. What I do know for sure is that they have a ton of data on inputs, outputs of code, of endless source code that they can scrape. And most importantly, the feedback from people giving a thumbs up, thumbs down, retrying and whatnot. And it seems like they decided to use that to refine a model to make V0 as good as possible. The result is that V0 consistently makes some of the best looking UIs of any AI platform I've used. But it seems like the magic behind a lot of that is the model that they built that is now able to be used via API. This dropped last night, which was the 21st, relatively late at almost 8 p.m. Pacific time, which is the region they're based out of. I know that because I live relatively close to the office. Why would they drop this out of nowhere so late at night? The reason is because today, Claude 4 dropped. You're probably watching this video the day or two after, maybe later. I don't know when you watch the video. I barely even know when it's going to come out. The point being, this model drop seems to have been timed as well as they could, because if they had done it after Claude 4, it wouldn't have had any splash at all. Now it still can. And there's a lot that we can learn from this model. I'm very excited to dive in with all of you, but as you guys know, Vercel and I broke up quite a while ago, so I'm not being paid a cent by them for this video. If anything, it's probably going to cost a lot of money because the price of the model is quite expensive. So yeah, someone has to cover the bill. So quick word from today's sponsor, and then we dive in. Obviously enough, I just went and set this up in T3 chat. The actual official guide when I tried to do this initially is that you use the OpenAI helper from the AI SDK because they didn't have their own provider for it yet, which doesn't sound like the big a deal because like everyone uses OpenAI standards, right? This AI package that I'm using, including the AI SDK stuff here, that's all by Vercel. So I just thought it was kind of funny to mention that if you wanted to use this last night, you had to use the OpenAI package by Vercel instead of the Vercel package by Vercel. Anyways. After a little bit of finagling, I got it working relatively well. I just have it in my dev environment here. And we got it to start generating some front end. It wasn't the fastest thing, but it did generate a lot of it. And I wanted to compare this to some testing I was doing earlier today to compare the different models, including O4 Mini, Claude 4 Opus, Claude 4 Sonnet, etc. I will say that by far the best looking one was Claude 4 Sonnet. So if we go to the Tailwind Playground, we can just throw this in quick. I have to yoink this guy, switch over to Tailwind 3.4, paste that here. And now we can see what the V4 version of Claude was able to generate for my quick fake homepage for T3 chat using Tailwind. And it came out pretty good looking, especially when you compare to the other options. Let me just grab one of the worst ones quick. 4.1s was pretty bad. This is what GPT 4.1 generated for reference. Didn't handle text color right, just kind of not great looking. The gradient's cool, although I'm sure that's going to compress like crap in the video. There's a reason I'm using a Chrome-based browser for all of this. Gradients are hard for Firefox and video. So how did V0 do? I have not looked at this yet. You guys are about to see my genuine reaction. Okay, it handles responsiveness better than all the others by quite a bit. Made these different sections. Testimonial section. It did a lot more. Like the actual length of the output is significantly longer. It was, 586 lines versus 106 versus 322. So double the length of the next longest. Very interesting. But it did it. It generated something pretty solid. But why would we care? What is the goal of this model? Their goal was stated pretty clearly here. It's designed for building modern web applications. It supports text and image inputs, provides fast streaming responses, and it's compatible with the OpenAI chat completions API format. Framework-aware completions, big deal, that it is trained on data for things like Next.js and Vercel. I don't know how well it will perform for other things like Svelte. You'll have to defer to Ben and people like that for this. Autofix, where it can identify and correct common coding issues during generation, which is really cool. Quick Edit, where it can stream inline edits as they are available. So it can stream edits down instead of having to stream down the whole new file. So if you're using this with like a Canvas experience where it edits code in line and sends diffs, It's built to do that well. It says multimodal. I don't know if it can generate images. I'd be curious to see if I tell it to what'll happen. Let's see. Generate an image of what that would look like. I was going to ask it and see what it tells me back. It might just spit back base 64, which would be really funny. You know, capability to edit or to generate images directly. Cool. That's what I figured. Good to see for real though. So what's the deal here? Why would Vercel bother making a model? I think there are a pile of reasons why Vercel would care. The first one, obviously enough, is quality of output. I would say there's a side piece here of relevance of output. These models are trained on billions upon billions of pieces of data. And all of those examples combine together to make something that is very general. But these generalized models don't necessarily have taste because their goal is to have as much as possible, not as tasteful as possible. Recently, there's been significant amounts of effort put into filtering the stuff that's used to make these models, as well as generating additional context for them. Things like DeepSeek R1 were almost certainly trained on the outputs of other models in order to make it more effective. As we run out of data to train against, and we want more quality data that represents the things that we want the models to do, having more data versus having curated data, the curated data is becoming more and more valuable. Makes a lot of sense that Vercel would want more curated data for a handful of reasons. One of the biggest ones is supporting new things Vercel wants to do. My honest guess is that some amount of the motivation here is because the cool things Vercel does now, like server components, HTTP streaming with server-sent events, the AI SDK, all the cool products, solutions, and stuff that Vercel is building is new enough and weird enough that the AI models don't know how to use it. You could add a bunch of stuff to your system prompt. You can add a bunch of rules and cursor and whatnot. But anybody who's used a framework that isn't vanilla React and TypeScript knows how rough that can be. It will randomly just start hallucinating React syntax in your stuff. Vercel is kind of lucky here where Tailwind and React and TypeScript and Next are prominent enough that these models tend to do them relatively well, but they're not very good at the new stuff, especially when they add these things in. As such, if Vercel can use rules to get it to start doing things more that way, get a bunch of data, both from the stuff that they generate themselves to train on, and also from all of V0's users, they can make something more refined. And that's, I think, the biggest thing they want. They want to make that thumbs up button more persistent across generations. What the hell do I mean by that? There are a lot of metrics that companies like Vercel or even companies like us with T3 Chat have to know how successful the product was and to know how happy you as a user are with those outputs. So if I'm the company providing this experience and I'm relying on third-party models, that thumbs up, thumbs down isn't making the model any better. It's not meaningfully improving the output in any way. Whereas on OpenAI, on ChatGPT, they can use that data to refine the model based on the outputs people did and didn't like and steer its weights in a direction that makes more sense for their users. And then they go way too far and you end up with glazed GPT and the whole sycophancy thing. But Vercel doesn't necessarily care about sycophancy. They care about making a model that generates code that you actually like. And also that code does the thing you want it to do. And ideally, it does that using tools that Vercel likes to use. That combination of interests makes a lot of sense for Vercel to use to go make a model with. They have all of this data from the generations people have been doing. They have all of this data from the thumbs up, thumbs down, and all the other metrics they can use to see how good those outputs are. And they have these things they want the model to be better at using that might not make it into these other models. And of course, the most important thing, they don't want to fully rely on Anthropic. There's a lot of companies that are in this boat, ourselves included with T3 Chat. Anthropic seems to have no interest in doing things like lowering the price. They don't have interest in adding a lot of other features we want, like image generation, like better stuff for structured outputs. Just a lot of the stuff more and more devs want, and Vercel clearly wants, that they're just not doing with the Claude models. There's even a good chance they got early access to Claude 4, because a ton of people did, and they didn't see it doing the things they wanted it to do. And with all of this combined, they decided the best bet was to make their own model. I wish they would have shared more details on what it meant to do that, but the fact that they did is pretty damn cool. I also think this is a bit of a hedging bet, as we saw from Guillermo talking about it here. The first thing he had to say about it is that you can bring V0's brain to tools like VS Code, Cursor, Windsurf, Codex CLI, or whatever else you want to build. So if you're using Cursor and you want the quality of output you get from V0 in Cursor, you can now get that. This is a thing I've actually wanted quite a bit. There have been multiple times where I took a giant component in T3 chat that was in my editor, copy pasted it over to Vercel, ran it in V0 just to try and redesign it and make it look better, then copy pasted the results back because I didn't have all the dependencies and API keys and all the other things I needed. And I was just copying back and forth between V0 and Cursor in order to get the output that I actually wanted, because it was a decent bit better at UI than any of the things I had in Cursor at the time. That has started to shift, but V0 has maintained its lead, in particular when it's using like ShadCN and Tailwind stuff. The idea of using V0, the model, inside of Cursor is actually really compelling. And it helps hedge a huge bet for them, which is number 5, no one vibe coding tool will win. As great as V0 is, the likelihood that they become this massive thing and no one else is using any other web app is unlikely. And if things like Bolt get popular enough and it's multi-framework enough, the likelihood that that leads to Vercel's success long-term is lower. If they have a model that is really good at doing full stack work and generates beautiful websites consistently, we can start relying on that model and no longer have to use V0 the product to get the benefits of the work that Vercel is putting in. You can almost see this as like a spectrum where there is, how does a company make the AI generated outputs better? The first step is the model. It's pretty hard to make something meaningfully better than what the model can generate, but then the model goes through another step, which is the system prompt. The system prompt is the thing that basically describes to the model what it can do. For example, here's the T3 chat system prompt. We generate a bunch of parts that are the things that we want the model to know about and the things that we want it to know it can do, how to refer to itself, what model it currently is, all these types of things. We don't hide this because we don't care that much. It's not super important. A lot of companies are starting to open up their system prompts because it's not that big a deal anymore. It used to be thought of as the secret sauce you wouldn't share. Now it's a much less big deal, which is again part of why models are so much more important. You then have tools. Tools are the things that models are told they can do. If you've used Cursor and you've told it to make a change across multiple files and you see it run grep to find the files to touch, that's a tool call that Cursor is providing Claude the ability to use. Cursor describes a tool and what capabilities it gives the AI, and then it can output text to trigger that tool, get a response, and then continue its generation accordingly. Tool calls have quickly become the bedrock of a ton of the cool stuff we see AI doing. And the system prompt has to describe what tools exist, how to use them, and what the format of the return will look like. You can almost think of it as like the system prompt are the type definitions or the JS doc of the tools, as well as a basic description of what the model should do and how it should behave. And then finally, we have the user prompt. And as we know, users are diamonds. So the model has to go through the system prompt, which then gives access to tools, and then the final output relies on the user's prompt, which then generates the output. There's a lot of alpha in tools right here. And historically, tool calling has been the big thing that tools like V0, Cursor, etc. have been focused on. Claude 3.5's huge win is that it was great with tool calls. And that's kind of what kickstarted this revolution of AI tooling that wasn't just text generation or crappy image gen. Tool calls have gotten so powerful that it's how OpenAI's image gen works for the most part. Instead of just diffusing an image out of noise, it uses tools to do things like render reflections, fix the lighting, make sure hands have the right number of fingers, add text on top of the image and render it the right angles. These tool call patterns are used to make outputs better and more reliable. And the results speak for themselves. These AI tools like Cursor is so much better now than it was a year ago because of this stuff. Also, I almost forgot obligatory. I'm an investor in Cursor. I think it comes up enough. You guys know that by now. I have no financial tie to Vercel whatsoever, though. So don't say I'm just shilling. I have lost more money on Vercel than most of you guys have any idea. So anyways, so historically, things like V0 were really focused on the tool side. But now there's a lot of competition on the tool side. The model creation companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., they're all making better tools and improving tool calls in their systems. Cursor is a very, very well-funded company doing nothing but tool call stuff, building the best possible editor experience. And as we established earlier, this part, the system prompt, is becoming less and less valuable. So if we think of this as like a sliding spectrum, we have no control over this part. We don't control the user prompts. We can help them be better at prompting. There's even a button in V0 that's enhance prompt to take the thing you asked for and make it better. But you're limited in how much you can do there. Obviously, it's the user, not you. Tool calls is becoming this incredibly competitive space, and keeping up with the best and keeping up with what users expect, if they really like the way the tools work in something like Cursor, getting them out of that's going to be really hard, especially with the amount of investment going in. System prompts are commoditized largely at this point, and even then, they're like a really good system prompt isn't going to make your business successful at all anymore. So this is what we're left with. And I think this is what happened at Vercel. We effectively moved down the pipe from how do we make the best prompts in order to generate good stuff, to what tools do they need, to how do we refine the actual outputs through system prompts, to the model. And they have a ton of data on what makes the model generations good. So the question now is kind of obvious. How do we win here? How do we go to this stage and make something that's more compelling so it can go through all these steps in other places, be it T3 chat, Cursor, Codex, Claude Code if it's forked and can be used with other things, Aider, and all these other tools. The amount of options that we have here keeps growing. So thinking you can win by building the best option here feels increasingly dumb. As such, Vercel's trying to do the whole spectrum, but most importantly, they want to do that, because if they succeed there, they have a really good chance of winning. I think this is a fascinating move. This is a really funny thing I didn't see, because it ends with -MD for the official model identifier, and it stands for medium, but in the Tailwind string convention, which is really funny, because again, it really does emphasize their focus being Tailwind and good full stack React-y developer experience. If they were doing this alone, I would call them insane. But the Claude 4 announcement today shows how valuable the space is, because Anthropic, a $66 billion company, opened their announcement of Claude 4 with, Claude Opus 4 is the world's best coding model. There's a lot of opportunity in this space. And for a first entrance, this model actually seems quite compelling. I am excited by the outputs I've seen so far. I'm terrified by the price. I'm considering adding it to T3 chat, but it feels much more focused on your editor than your chat generator. So let me know if you think this is something that belongs in T3 chat. We would probably require bring your own key or make it premium out messages because it's expensive and it outputs a ton of stuff. So what do you think? Am I crazy, or is this actually pretty cool? Until next time, peace nerds.